Hello, I'm Danette Fenton-Menzies and welcome to the Adapt with Danette FM podcast. I'm an author, a speaker and an executive coach and an expert in adaptability and particularly around leadership. And I've been doing that for over 10 years. Jez, welcome in.
Thank you. Hello, I'm the podcast producer, comedian, and the son of Danette. But I wanted to give a little bit more about Danette. So Danette, you are the co-founder and director of learning of Magical Learning, which has been running for over 25 years as a training and facilitation company, specializing in leadership, finance, and actually making learning enjoyable. At Magical Learning, we've worked with companies like Coles, Westpac, and the Australian government, and partnered with global industry leaders like Robin Sharma and John Mattone. We release episodes every week, so feel free to stay on the feed and jump over to YouTube. We do clips as well. But this podcast is about giving a free resource to help people be adaptable. And Danette, you're the perfect person to talk to about that. So I'm so happy to be here.
Very excited as well, Jez.
Danette, it's been a little while since we've actually caught up. So can you tell me what you've been up to since our last catch-up to catch up the listeners?
I've been writing my next book, which is around building communication skills, particularly for families and family-run businesses. I've also had the best time because I got to go to New Zealand to a retreat called Mana, M-A-N-A, which is in the Coromandel, so it's sort of east of Auckland. I got to spend a couple of days there just having a wonderful time at it's called Restorative Yoga Retreat, run by Lisa O'Neill. Was fabulous. Came back very rested.
And also, Danette, I think this also ties into adaptability, but we're hearing some sounds through your microphone. What is making those sounds? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
That could be my baby guinea fowls. They're not babies anymore, but they're very noisy and they love to chatter away when they see something different. So they're the best guard dogs without them actually being dogs, although I do love dogs too.
And I wanted to highlight that because, Danette, you're recording from a farm, even though you work with international global leaders and, big national companies here in Australia and overseas as well. So I guess, Danette, that's a little bit of adaptability. How do you find sort of operating at that global level, but from sort of a bit more of a regional base?
Well, I have to say I'm very blessed to live on a farm, literally I say in the middle of nowhere, and we have great internet. So there's a local provider who bounces the NBN, which is Australia's internet, out to our farm, which is about a half an hour out of town. And so that allows us to be able to run a business from a farm in the middle of nowhere. And when I need to, I travel. The wonderful thing, but is a lot of the big clients, including international ones, are perfectly okay doing a lot of work online. And I actually really love online. Once you get used to it, it allows people to learn and not necessarily lose a lot of time due to travel. I also love face-to-face, and I feel very blessed that I can do both.
Yeah, it's great, and it's a great system, and I think a lot of people would love to live that lifestyle. So I think it's very exciting that you're sort of showing people the way to do that. Well, Danette, I think before we get into today's conversation, we've got to jump into our first segment here, which is, of course, Adapt the News. What we're going to be doing here today, Danette, is I'm going to be giving you a news story and you're going to be looking at it through your adaptability expert lens and sort of picking out some key details that people can take away. And we want to do this because we want to highlight some current things that people are doing to be adaptable and also ways that people could be more adaptable. So this week's story actually comes from CNN, but it's about Australia, okay? And the headline is Australia's Great Barrier Reef tries to make sustainability cool. And the topic of the article is this business called Guardian of the Reef, which is a website where people planning visits to the Great Barrier Reef can watch informative videos to unlock 10 to 20% discounts off of hotels or book custom experiences that aren't available elsewhere. And what this is about is making people more conservation focused when they travel, which is actually something that, according to Expedia, 90% of people are interested in sustainable options when traveling. So this is sort of a new way to sort of look at that problem of bringing in tourists, but also encouraging them to be sustainable. One of the things that you can do there is put a new type of seagrass in that local turtles like, so you can help build the local turtle population, or you can go to the coral reef and plant new corals, which of course is going to build that reef over time. So this is an interesting way to sort of tackle a tourism thing and the damage that tourism can do, and sort of combining it to make it actually fit for purpose. But Danette, did you have any takeaways when you read this story?
I loved this story, and I really love the idea of the guardians of the reef, because this is particularly what we're focused on in this season about collaboration and problem solving. They've realised that tourists are actually interested in helping with conservation, and rather than going, well, work it out for yourself, they've made it through creating a website, standing up a video that if people watch then gives them access to discounts, and also things that no one else can get access to. So I really love that it's rewarding the behaviour of, exactly what we need for the Great Barrier Reef, which is making sure that we are able to keep it for the longer term. So making sure that what we do, it results in sustainable results. I love the idea that they went, you know what, we're not going to fight people. We're going to use technology in a really beautiful way and reward the behaviours that we want to reward. And I'm really curious to see how this plays out in, I imagine, 6 to 12 months, where they're seeking feedback from those clients and improving what the website does even more than it's currently doing. So I think this is a really smart case study. I love that it was captured by overseas news. And I hope also that our Australian news outlets highlight this too, because, it is one of our natural wonders. It brings in an enormous amount of money each year for people coming to Australia to see the Great Barrier Reef. What a great initiative to collaborate with the tourists to create something that helps make the Great Barrier Reef a bit more sustainable long term. I think it was just such a great news story, and thanks for highlighting it, Jez.
Fantastic. Well, Danette, that was great insight, and that was a very fun episode of Adapt the News there.
So let's talk about this particular podcast and our guest, Bernie Kelly.
Yeah, so Bernie is a friend of Magical Learning and us, Danette, here at the Adapt with Danette FM podcast. We've had Bernie on the Magical Learning podcast a few times, and what a great guest he is. He's always got such good insights. Did you have anything that you sort of, with this chat, that you sort of took away, or was a big sort of idea that you liked?
I really liked how Bernie focused on building your own self-awareness. So when we're talking about things like collaboration and problem solving, unless you build and work on your self-awareness, it's really easy to think that everyone thinks like you. And actually one of the benefits of collaboration when we do it really well is we get access to intelligence that we don't have ourselves personally. So I love that he also provided some questions throughout the podcast that we can help to grow our particular self-awareness, so that we can become a better collaborator and a better problem solver as well. It's such a great episode. Just love it.
Well, I think without further ado, let's jump into this episode of Adapt with Danette FM between Danette and our friend, Bernie Kelly.
Hello and welcome to season 2 of Adapt with Danette FM. And this season we're focusing in on collaboration and problem solving. And in today's conversation, we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into collaboration as the focus. So I'd love to introduce my guest, Bernie Kelly, and I'm going to hand it over to Bernie to introduce himself. We've had lots of good conversations, so I know you as listeners and viewers are going to really love this one.
Hey, Danette, how you doing? I'm really looking forward to this conversation. As we were saying in the lead-in, the pondering, my whole career has been immersed in collaborative problem solving and improvement work. And that actually makes for lots of ponderings, which we're going to dig into in this session here. I work, I do a lot of mentoring, what I call chief transformation officers. Their role might be various role titles. They could be the CEO, they could be the chief operating officer, maybe another member of the exec team, and also facilitating exec teams and boards who are sort of leading transformative processes or transformative phases in their strategy. Particularly purpose-led organisations at the moment, I'm finding we've got the big intentions, but actually lining ourselves up with that intention is, I think, the challenge of our times for the purpose-led.
Beautiful, love that. So we'll start on the first question, which is, what have you seen or experienced that helps you, particularly with collaboration?
I had a career in leading supply chains across organizations and countries for big brands, global brands such as Kleenex and Smirnoff, Johnny Walker, and then at the sort of national Australian level, Golden Circle. So that sort of had me deeply, deeply immersed in delivering high performance outcomes across lots and lots of different people. And it's interesting reflecting in this topic of around collaboration, because I've done lots of reflection since, but 20 plus years ago, my work leading collaborations across organizations was already an international case study in the Master of Business program. So if you were to Google Bernie Kelly, the perfect pineapple, and Professor Peter Hines, who was the lead author on that, there's a whole academic piece on that stuff, which is fascinating.
Tell us more.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Just that whole it was an industry at that time. It was actually a lot of different things going on. And in hindsight, it was multiple different food groups that were sort of leading. But the pineapple was this is when I was leading up the operations and supply chain for Golden Circle in Australia. And the pineapple was our champion product. We had a lot of other products, but the pineapple was the champion product. And from a collaboration point of view, the guiding question really, well, what is the perfect pineapple? Right. But then you actually get lots and lots of different people together. The growers, it was actually something that grew well and yielded the best for their farm. The transport companies, something that didn't damage too much. You could go along the whole value chain. We were working with Michael Luscombe. He was the general manager of supply chain for Woolworths at the time, that later became the CEO there. And so the retailers, they wanted reliability, they wanted availability all year. They even joked about actually wanting it to be square so it could pack well on their shelves. That was their perfect pineapple. But then, and really from the business's point of view, we wanted to have all these happy stakeholders, but actually have factories that ran well. We were, from an Australian-based point of view, totally out of whack with what they were doing in other parts of the world from a performance point of view. So there was all these different perspectives, and actually using that as what really mattered to you, and actually giving space to respecting that. Well, that was the foundation of that whole value streams collaborative initiatives that we come up with out of all of that work.
And I loved you started with a question, and by bringing in and collaborating with so many different stakeholders, those perspectives are quite different. And
yeah.
I think sometimes people, when they're not so aware, they think their perspective is the same as everyone else's. And this is why collaboration is so important, because you just get such diverse perspectives.
And I think that when you're having just transactional problem solving, you can ring up supplier A or B and go, hey, I need this for that. But I'd already, prior to that, actually had a lot of experience with the collaboration when I was with Kimberly-Clark, because we actually had equipment and operating standards that weren't in this part of the world. So there was no one. We actually had to collaborate with people to get them to lift to the level to be able to run our equipment at the pace that we wanted to run. So we actually had to, so you couldn't sort of just do that sort of transactional work of going out and saying, hey, supplier A, here's the spec. We actually had to work together to get all these, what's holding us back? How do we do this? So all of that sort of problem solving, which I think, that I think is really where collaboration really happens, when you're achieving things that you couldn't have achieved by yourself, or you couldn't have achieved, at the outset.
And I love that, because you all already have made that linkage to the problem solving as well, because better collaboration obviously helps you with more perspectives, which helps with problem solving as well.
Totally right. And so in the collaboration space, I really do emphasize that sort of zoom out, like what actually is the big picture here, what's happening in the world, and all these other perspectives that no matter who you are, we can't have all the perspectives. So really going big, global, sort of zoom out sort of thing, back down. It always comes back to, in collaboration though, back down to how well do I know myself and how I'm interacting with people, right? And so how do you zoom out, zoom in? And that actually is that's where the real mastery in this collaboration conversation happens, I think.
Love that. And we're totally on the same page. So let's go to the flip side of that, which is, and you don't have to name the organisation, but could you share an example of poor collaboration, and particularly what were the impacts because it wasn't done well?
Without being judgmental, I reckon that we fall into the trap. We, you, me, and everyone. But it is so easy to fall into what I would call poor collaboration, right? Now, there's obviously the train wreck end of this conversation, but I reckon actually the more valuable conversation for the people that are, I find the people that are following my work, your work, we're already proactive people, right? We're already good performers. So I'd rather move the conversation, not pour that end, but just missing, right? And I think there's a
Okay.
version of that collaboration where it's which I can fall for, others can fall for, which is just it's a little bit transactional in that I probably know the answer already, and I'm really doing a 1+1 =2, and I'm calling it collaboration. And I think that's probably more like that's really common if you look around. Most government organisations at the moment doing it, most corporates doing that version of collaboration, even when we're not really necessarily intending that. So I draw a line here, which is actually that sort of grey version of collaboration, which is going through all the correct corporate managerial methods versus actually letting myself be a bit more expanded than that, where I'm actually going, well, I don't really know the answer to this, and I'm leaning in to a space that I don't really know where it's going to go next month. Now I'm doing all the rigorous stuff to make sure that's probably going in the right direction, but really the answer is going to unfold because of who I'm collaborating with, and that actually is good collaboration. And I think most of us, if we're not intentional, if we're not really super intentional, we drift back into this one here. And so that's that line there, I think, is where I like to call out. And yeah, you could sit around and even look at things that I've been doing over the last couple of years. And you can see it is so easy to get excited about an initiative, jump into it, but then the people that you collaborate with are the ones that you sort of feel you've got a guaranteed outcome with. And that's a version of it's a diluted version of the power of collaboration.
Great example. And yeah, even that insight about how you feel. So, like if it's more transactional rather than relational, it's stretching you versus not stretching you. There's some indicators there that, oh, maybe I'm sitting on that fine line and maybe I'm not going just a little bit more. So that discomfort, and obviously the relational thing too, because when we're transactional, there's very often very low trust. As
Yeah.
opposed to relational, people go, hey, hang on, can we just go back a bit? So I
Yeah.
love that.
No, I think for the people that are listening to this, right, there's the train wreck end of this conversation, which, like, even when you use the word like trust, like I'm finding this with a lot of my clients now, they go, oh, no, we're all good trust. And you go, no, we're sort of in this middle zone, right, which is just the common version, which is not untrustworthy, but it's just not the same as the elite end. And I think there's really poor trust, which is a whole conversation to itself. But yeah, for us who are doing good work, being aware of this line is way more powerful. The line here between just blurry, regular day to day, and no, I'm really trusting you, and I don't know how this is going to play out, but I'm going for it with you. That's actually a different thing, right?
Love that so much. All right, let's look at the next one, which is based on your experience. What tips would you have for others, including perhaps young people? And Jez brought this into the question because there'll be young people that are just starting out in their career. Collaboration's a part of what they need to do, but or equally, they could be people my age who need to learn more around developing their collaboration skills. So love to hear some of your tips and some of your experience.
Yeah. Firstly, I just want to call out that this question, when the young people part, did trigger me a little bit because I think I work with accomplished leaders, but it's really fascinating to me that the age demographic isn't, you could be 25 and already be an accomplished leader, right? And what I mean by that is that people who are having a go and they've done some stuff and they come back again is, so I think that, so I'm speaking to all like accomplished leaders, people that are having a go, coming back again and having a bit of reflection and maybe listening to things like this. The biggest tip I have for that collaboration is just the power of perspectives, and the more I know, the more I don't know. So even if how long I've been in the game, the more I know, the more I know I don't know. So approach it humbly, curiosity, all those good things. But as we were saying before, just that, what is the biggest view that I can take on this? And there's always a bigger view than your first think, right? Because even at the moment, working with a lot of national organizations, and you say, no, let's look at the whole world. Then you look at like a world-class organization, you go, no, get outside of our industry box, right? Like there's always a bigger perspective to take, and it's so much power in that, right? But then coming back into me, like, do I really know myself? And especially in a field like collaboration, am I hung up on my who am I being in this collaboration? Am I being a good collaborator? Am I being an open, trustworthy person? Am I actually caring enough that you actually feel comfortable with me? Am I really open to my thinking? Because I might say I'm open thinking, but am I? And then am I also doing the work? Am I, backing up what I say? And I think that it's really interesting coming back to yourself with all of these. I think so. Like before, I said like the supply chain with the whole of like that whole end to end, all these organizations. But at the end of the day, was I being respectful, engaging? Was I facilitating the right sort of conversations? Was I actually giving space to people? There's the zoom in, the zoom out, the zoom in. And then I think that's sort of my advice on that, to play both, and you actually see so much more than you would if otherwise.
I love that. And that awareness piece is so important because our ego can come out at times in conversations and we're not even aware of it. This happened to me, and I wrote a social media post about it where I was talking to one of my team members and she started to say something and I went, no, but, and she went, hang on, you haven't even heard me yet. And I was like, oh, crap.
Yeah.
That's me not listening. And so that awareness wasn't in that conversation. And thank goodness she trusted me enough to go, hang on. Because, depending on the hierarchy and how an organization goes, sometimes people won't say, hang on. They'll just go, okay, you think you're the boss, you've got the title, off you go. And then we end up with blind spots, which is not good either.
I would hate to be able to do an audit on myself and see how many times that's happened, right? Because I think that the more reflective you are, the more I'm doing lots of conscious, intentional practice in that now, and I'm seeing it a lot. But I know that if I think about me at various other stages, I must have been marching through all of that. And the other build, I guess, as a piece of advice, which is something I practice myself, and I definitely everyone I work with, is actually taking a breath. Now I know that sounds a little bit like why you're talking about global supply chains and end-to-end and all these sort of complex sort of really technical sort of things, but actually over the last probably 7 or 8 years I've nerded out on this sort of stuff because I've gone deep with my mentoring, right? And it is interesting that how much of it comes back down to that the space between action and reaction. So we can psychology and neuroscience and all the organizational levels of complexity that goes above those. And it keeps coming back to that space there. Am I even seeing these things? And so my other piece of advice that I definitely practice and I tell everyone to work with is actually, are you putting pauses through your day so that you aren't just trampling through that moment that you just talked about, that if we're honest, all of us have that one.
I love that. And I can say to people, we think our brain is doing the hard lifting when we're working, but it's actually in the spaces and the breaks where it makes new connections. And so that second bit of advice around the space is so important in a society where we're often rewarded for action versus reflection. And it is really wise advice. So I double down on that and say, awesome bit of advice that
if someone was listening to this and they were sort of wanted to nerd out on that stuff, the best that I'm finding, do you know Cal Newport, the professor from the US? I
just finished Slow Productivity yesterday. How good is his book?
Yeah. Well, we're both going to have a little rave about it. We could set up another conversation where we're just talking about. I just think that I think he's capturing something really deep in that conversation. I've already sort of been on that track myself for ages, and he's really just wrapped it up in a really sort of simple way. And it is really interesting with the clarity that he's got it there. And you just think about people that that have had amazing impact over decades. They weren't running around like cats on a hot tin roof, like that all of us are with our phones and our apps and they weren't doing that. they had something that they plugged away at, and they produced amazing work. So he really goes on a lot about the natural pace and focusing on deep quality, deep impact work. It's profound
His
stuff.
first book that I read, because I just loved the name, was A World Without Email.
Oh yeah,
And that
yeah, yeah,
was
yeah.
such a brilliant book. And I've just absolutely adored slow productivity. Just, yeah, because it resonates with me, like
Yeah.
the crazy, particularly living out on a farm, we've got lots of nature around us, to go into town and watch people being on their phones, multitasking and stuff. And I'm like, oh, this is not good. Like even my brain just starts to go, this can't be good for us. Whereas the slow pace, it makes more sense because you're working with your brain versus against it.
Yeah, and this is so true. Like we're having a deep dive into collaboration, right? And so strategy work is quite often collaboration work because you've got a board or an exec team who've all got amazing different perspectives. They're very aware of their own teams who have all these other amazing inputs, and we bring our operational mind. That's a real observation I'm making is we're actually many exec teams turning up to strategy work, and you go, well, that sort of frenetic sort of I've got my phone up, I've got my iPad going, I'm whatever, and that you think, well, yeah, I don't really get it, but I sort of get it how it might be your operational mode. That doesn't work for deep strategic thinking and collaboration, and where you do need to pause, and that's a perspective I've never come across before. How do I even take it in? Because that's the other thing again when you start to go into the neuroscience. If a perspective that I've never heard before probably doesn't even go into my brain, like it's just I don't even let it in. Like so here I'm saying I'm turning up for strategy work. I've slotted it in for 45 minutes. I've got Danette's got 3 minutes to talk. Like, like 1 second.
It's so true. And yeah, if we're not slowed down, you're literally right. We're not going to pick up that perspective. And yet that's where the genius, because it's like, oh, I never realized that.
Mm.
Wow, that's really shift. And even Cal Newport's, that first book, when I saw the title, I'm like, A World Without Email. Whoa. That, because everyone was complaining about, and I think I read it in the middle of COVID. And so even just pausing to look at that title and go,
Yeah.
wow, what's that about? How can that happen? Was enough to give me, I spent the day and I literally read the book in a day because I was like, I want to learn about this. But then I went back to the business and went, okay, where are we using email not effectively? And even like one really simple thing we changed in our business is that emails don't go out unless they're during office hours. So that send later part of our email now, that happens a lot. So that if I come up with an idea on the weekend, my team don't get it till about 10 o'clock on Monday to
Yeah.
give them time to ease in from the weekend. And that's a really just simple tip for them.
I used to be guilty of that myself. I've got a restless mind. It's creative. It's got stuff going on off everywhere, and I used to capture that and copy like key team members. And yeah, so one tip that I took up years ago is I only send it to myself. And then sometimes, on a Monday morning, I look at them and go like, oh, there's 8 of these little thought bombs. That back to the collaboration, but that's not respecting my collaborator. I won't give it to them. What am I trying to say in that pile of 8 emails?
I
Just trying
love
to
that. I
bunch
love
it.
that. Yeah. That's beautiful. It's usually only one a weekend, so I'm like, okay, that can wait till Monday or Tuesday, or depending on the team member too, because they don't all work Mondays. So yeah.
Hmm.
So my next question is, I'm really interested. What's your favorite example of collaboration and why?
Mm. I'm going to go back to my zoom out, zoom in thing, right? So at the zoom out level, I just think those really grand collaborations that made a massive difference to history. And you think so, like some of the ones that I think are amazing because they lasted over centuries and they've engaged thousands of people. So like the sort of the European Asia trade cycles that happened for hundreds of years, between families going through different ports and bringing together all these different. When you look at that, and they didn't have email. We were just chatting about email. They didn't have any of this tech stuff we had, but they produced amazingly. Their outcomes that they were delivering over decades, centuries is just, so I just think that's an amazingly complex web of humanity. Another big picture one like that, when you think about what the Allies did in World War II, all the different things they pulled together, like humanity had never pulled together so much human and technological capability before. So that's another one that ranks up there in my big picture. And then the other one, which I think is probably a classic, is just the man on the moon. And again, there's so many, just from a focus, from a shared purpose point of view, just there's a lot of good value in that story as well.
Great examples, and for many of them, when you think NASA would have had computers back in those days, but in the trade stuff between Europe and Asia, it was the boat came in, the ship came in, and they made it work. And often, long distances, not a lot of communication, so a massive amount of trust that for a lot of times worked really well. So I love that example.
Yeah. So I know someone I've been working with recently. So Judith O'Callaghan, comes from like one of those long-standing trading families, and it is really fascinating all the little customs and habits that they built in, and they taught each other to produce that reliability. Because I think again, when you look at amazing collaboration, there's stuff that you and I want to think about, but there's stuff we don't want to think about. And the stuff that we don't want to think about is good if you and I have already agreed it, we've locked it away, right? So that we can build on better things. And I think great collaborators are doing that all the time. They're actually having those confirmation conversations, and we set up rituals that go, yep, that's something we've locked in. Now we're looking at the next thing. And that's actually where those sort of really long-standing collaborations, I think we can learn a lot from.
Great example again too.
I'm going to do the zoom in though, because you can't avoid the zoom in. And I think that the zoom in, the best example I think is actually like a marriage, because you don't know the challenges you're going to face. You don't know the twists and turns where the other person's strengths, your strengths or weaknesses are going to appear, but you actually work through amazing things together over time. And I think that in that really smaller, or when I say more zoomed in version, there's nowhere to hide either, right? Like up in the big scale, lots of good players and maybe some less the good players, but down here it's actually, there's nowhere to hide, right? It's actually, what am I doing? How am I going? Am I actually being the generous person? Am I doing all the things that I would like to be doing in this collaboration with shared purpose?
I love that. And marriage is like, that's such a great example, and also a metaphor for people to think about. You don't have to be married, but those really strong relationships you can't hide.
I think that marriage is, when we're a collaboration. So a lot of people think about collaborations on the upside, like that like I want to grow a business, who can I collaborate with in another part of the world, for example. But I think also, but we don't want to underplay where collaborations help you get through a hard patch where you would never have got through. And I think that actually is interesting when you think like the marriage metaphor, because you hit different points, health things, things your children have gone through, that there's just no way that I would have. I think I reflect on my life, and there's no way that I would have had all that perspective. There's angles that just wouldn't have come to me.
And the best thing about being a partner is you see the other person's blind spots, don't you? And that's a totally interesting conversation as well.
but I think that's the same in business collaborations too, right? That a good collaboration will work through the hard patch, and even if it is uncomfortable for you at the time, you can still, without that collaboration and that collaboration strength, would you have got through that hard patch? You don't know.
Makes us stronger, which is beautiful. And so my last question is there anything else you'd like to share, including any helpful resources that our listeners and viewers might want to access?
Well, I think we've already talked about it. So I'm definitely sharing, we're heading into FY25. I'm definitely sharing that slow productivity with lots of smart leaders at the moment, because I think that actually, it captures a lot of the work that I'm doing with leaders, because we are talking about more. These are not times just to keep trotting out the answer that worked for me last year. So I think that things like slow productivity is a great resource. I've got this book this is a really good read. It's worth checking
Thanks
out.
you, Bernie. Where's your book?
The Adaptable Leader, 7 Skills to Succeed During Uncertainty by Danette. That's a good one. And then I'm also, my obsession is actually on helping purpose-led leaders, remaining fit for purpose because the environment is shifting so much. So I actually have been putting a lot more resources onto my own website and my LinkedIn profile, right? So berniekelly.com and remaining fit. So I'm actually, there's written stuff, there's surveys that are done. I'm going to be making available tools that people can use for themselves, for their own organization, and also just the video things. Because the other thing I've been finding for helping internal change leaders is books are great, but they don't always get read, right? So actually adding alongside that really short video snippets that people can play and talk to and really go deeper on certain topics. So I've been sort of adding a lot of video content into my website and LinkedIn stuff lately as well.
And we'll make sure in the podcast description that we put those links in there as well.
Thank you very much.
Bernie, did you want to share your book?
Yeah, so at the moment I've got a book that I wrote in 2020 called Traction, right, which is actually about change fit leadership teams. But then at the moment, though, it's a living book. It's actually all these things coming together. And it's available on my website as Remaining Fit for Purpose. And then inside there, I've got all these, it's becoming too valuable, I think, because it's really, I'm designing it as a user, as a practitioner, rather than just theory of it. So I've got things in there that include like my budget owner boost because I think, again, a lot of things people connect to like strategy and then day to day, and there's a lot of linkages that we can actually make the most of in the budget that I like to sort of point out, and that actually is a really useful tool. And then another smaller book which I've actually got. Can you see that there? The 10 by 10 considerations, because this one is lots of people leading those awareness sessions, and if we've all come from exactly the same place, we sit there and go, can you think of anything else, Danette? And you go, yeah, that same thing you said. And I go, yeah. And we have a great conversation, but we haven't really expanded. I go through 10 angles and I unpack 10 examples under 10 angles. And what it really does is it's just a facilitator's tool, or like I even sort of joke about it being a little bit like Sudoku for the individual, because my brain goes, oh, I haven't thought of that, and unpacks all these different dimensions. And that's really useful for pre-strategy work. And that's all part of that remaining fit for purpose work.
Excellent. Love it. So our viewers and our listeners are going to have lots and lots of helpful resources as they move forward on this. And it's part of why I created the podcast. Is the book is published, and then it's like, how do we continue and deepen the conversations around different elements of my model? And two of the elements were collaboration and problem solving. So I went, let's talk about that in season 2. So I love this whole idea, and your creation of the living book is just, the book goes from being something very static to, okay, I need stuff, I'll dip in and out across time, rather than I've read it and it's on the shelf, or I haven't read it, it's just sitting on the shelf.
I know that you and I are leaning into being adaptable ourselves and how do we help others adapt. And I think, like, do you remember, it feels so last decade now, so 2010s, but a lot of people were talking about the future of, or being change fit for the future and all this sort of stuff. And I even look back on some of my correspondence to see that I was sort of into that energy as well. But at the moment, I just think like that's just so not useful. I really think it's a current practice. And that actually is where, if you're going back to a tip for people, is to stop talking about the future and talk about what's happening now that is going to, that you can see too many patterns that are not actually a bit like the future word gave a lot of us a bit of a, I can take a deep breath, that's actually out in the future. Yeah, no, what we're doing now is directly connected to that. And I think that we've been caught flat-footed a bit too much in many angles. So how not to be caught flat-footed and be doing this adaptability work right now and setting up things so that I remain fit for purpose is actually a key I think, with this sort of stuff.
Love that. So we're just about at the end, and I wanted to check, is there anything else you wanted to share before we finish up?
Yeah, I do. I want to share appreciation and encouragement to you for this good work, right? Because I do think that there's a big gap between nice intentions and doing. And I think for many of us that are purpose-led leaders, actually, people that are doing the work like you are a role model to us to keep going. Okay, well, I've got nice intentions, but am I doing it, right? And so I just want to give you a shout out, appreciation, and respect for the good work you're doing here.
Thanks so much, Bernie. And I love this. Like, for me, I love to learn. So this sits with my purpose just beautifully, because every conversation I learn some things that go, oh yeah, that could add. And
Yeah.
I love that bit you talked about earlier about humble, because there are times when my ego comes out and the humbleness goes away, and I'm like, I have just become a know-it-all, and I've stopped doing what I'm preaching about and what I'm really passionate about. And so that humility is just such a beautiful, and you know, we've had many conversations. You are such a beautiful, humble leader, and are willing to go, yeah, and I didn't do this so well either. And I think that as leaders in this time where we're never always going to have the right answer, to stay open, to stay humble, and to look for those different perspectives through others, and collaborating, you know, whether it's really big or whether it's looking first at yourself and am I fit to actually be able to collaborate yet? I love that perspective. So really appreciate you coming and joining me on this podcast, and I'm sure next season I'll have you back as well. So thank you very
Always
much.
a pleasure catching up, Danette. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Alrighty, well, what a great conversation, and as always, great to see Bernie again. Love to catch up with him, and it's always a pleasure. When he sends me an email, I'm always like, yes, great to see what Bernie's up to.
Yes.
So, Danette, with that conversation, I mean, Bernie covered a lot, and you both chatted about so many things, but what were some key takeaways for you?
I loved how many stakeholders he brought into that perfect pineapple conversation. And I really liked the bit he said, and I'm going to read it out so I make sure that I am quoting him correctly, that his biggest tip on collaboration is the power of perspectives. And so he said the more he knows, the less he knows. And so it's about being humbly curious. And I really like at the end, he talks about it's actually really important for us to slow down to pick up perspectives, because perspectives allow us to move past our individual blind spots. So I really, really love that. As always, conversations with Bernie just opened my mind. So it was a fabulous conversation. What about you, Jez?
Yeah, I had a lot of notes as well. I mean, that perfect pineapple thing, just about how it's not really possible to design the perfect pineapple. That actually is the challenge, but he did a great job. But I liked the bit, and this comes up in later episodes as well, but the sort of topic about how some people think collaboration is, I have an idea, I'm going to bring it to you, and then that's the collaboration, and you can just sit and ignore it, and, you know, people may feel uncomfortable to challenge it.
Yes.
But he said that's not what it's about, and it's about taking that natural pace, exactly what you talked about there. So yeah, no, I just thought he had so many great insights. I thought it was interesting how he talked about World War II and how that was such a good example of collaboration as well, and that's so true. You know, you can get things done really quickly if everyone's really on the same page.
Yep.
So I thought that was fantastic, and as always, great to catch up with Bernie again.
Yes, totally.
Well, speaking of catching up with people, Danette, it's time to go to our mailbag segment. So let's check out that new logo.
I love
All right.
that.
So
First time I've seen that.
Yes, exactly.
That's awesome.
So we're doing Ask and Adapt. So this is where people get a chance to ask you and learn how to adapt. And today we've got a write-in from our listener, Carlo. He says, "Hi, Danette. I'm 35 and considering moving from the city to the country as house prices are getting a bit steep where I live. I know you live in the country, but also do work in cities. So how do you balance that? What are some of the challenges and what are some of the benefits? Thank you, Carlo."
Carlo, what a great question. And I'm always going to favour living in the country. There are so many benefits not just cheaper housing. One of the things I find about living in the country is there's a lot more connection often, because even though your neighbours are further apart, there's this whole thing in the country about people are curious because they need to look after each other. So I love that from an adaptable perspective, because when we feel like people have got our backs, we tend to work with our brain better. So I think what you'll find is living in the country, lots and lots of benefits, including things like just being in nature, which is really good for our mental health and our physical health as well. The other thing is life tends to be a little more quieter, which I think in this day of us being really busy, being able to sort of slow down a bit to the pace of nature, which you'll see all around you, actually is really good for not only your physical health, but I also think your emotional and your mental health. And I would also add there your spiritual health. Some of the challenges is obviously things are further away. So I live on a farm. Nearest shops are about half an hour away, as is the nearest medical support, etc. So I suppose it teaches you to be adaptable, because it's like, okay, I've run out of something. Is it worth driving into the shops half an hour to get that? Yeah, probably not if it's only one or two things. And obviously if I'm travelling for work where I might be doing face-to-face training, that obviously eats into my day. And I often use that time where I don't listen to anything and I just let my brain chill a little bit. So I actually find the drive time's not too bad. And Carla, I really liked the fact that you asked about balance. So earlier in this episode, we talked about how I went on a restorative yoga retreat. I always am looking at my calendar and thinking, okay, what's sort of the maximum I want to be doing training? And usually for me, a good balance is 2 to 3 days a week, whether that's face-to-face or online. And if I've got a particularly big week coming up, I'll make sure that my weekend is clear, so I'm not doing anything. And I've been experimenting with digital detoxes. So from Friday night through to Sunday morning, I actually turn off all my devices and I read an actual book, or I go for a walk in nature, I get out in the garden. And what I've discovered is that actually really helps with my balance, because it makes me feel nice and chill when I come back to the world. And I tend to be, or I've noticed, that I'm way more productive for the rest of the week. So for me, I love being surrounded by nature, and sets the pace of my life in a beautiful, beautiful way. So I love your curiosity, Carla. Tell us when you decide where you're going to be, and if you've got any more questions, we'd love for you to share them with us.
Yes, absolutely. And I just wanted to sort of second a little bit of what you're saying there, Danette, which is that I read recently that sort of back about 300, 400 years ago, the amount of information that someone received in their whole lifetime was the equivalent of a New York Times newspaper, just a single one.
Wow.
So the amount of information we're receiving now is, it's way more than that on a daily basis for a lot of people. If you're on Instagram, that's so much information that's going through. So you're so right about that digital detox. Even I've noticed, I've been trying to take a lot more time to just really slow down and not use social media as much. And I'm finding a slower brain is making me feel a lot calmer and happier. And then obviously on a farm, you have the nature aspect. And you know what I love about nature is that nature is a really good way of giving you a lot of metaphors that can help you be more resilient. Anything that you think of in nature can act basically as a metaphor, whether it's a tree taking a long time to slowly build something very strong, or whether it's grass, which just shoots up just fresh after some sort of event to sort of just start taking the sunlight. There's so many interesting metaphors out there. So I think being on a farm really gives you a lot more of that, because you're just surrounded by more nature.
Yep, totally agree. I feel so blessed, yes.
Well, Danette, what a great episode. And also I wanted to highlight, thank you everybody who's been listening and sharing. Our last episode, we really got huge numbers, the Dr. Richard Hodge episode. To be in the top 1% of podcasts, you need to get 1,200 plays, and we got 2,000 plays for that one. So we highly recommend people go check out that episode with Dr. Richard Hodge. It's an absolute winner, and you did a great job with that one, Danette.
Thank you so much, Jez. So good. And always love to say thank you to those that listen and watch our episodes. And I'd love to say thank you, Jez, for joining me yet again, and to everyone else, stay adaptable.